All right, well, welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us today. Where are you at the moment, and what's your current COVID situation?
Well, we're at home in Cleveland and Moreton Bay in southeast Queensland. We're staying out of trouble up here.
Excellent. And getting out on the boat at all at the moment, or?
We've been able to, Brent. Yes, yeah, we've got restrictions are pretty liberal here at the moment. So yes.
You'll probably be inundated with New South Welshmen shortly. I'm up there next week, so look out. But we're clean, I promise. So before we get into the subject, always asks, I guess, where did it all start for you guys as far as cruising goes, and really, what was the first boat? Where did you start with from there?
Well, I think you're going to show us our first boat, Brent. Well, I started off in Sabos.
There we go.
I'm 9 years old.
9-year-old in Sabos. Yeah, I think I started out in a little Sabo myself, actually. So great little boats for learning in. And what about you, Debbie?
I knew nothing about sailing until I met Warren, and he was sailing skiffs at that point. And I had one go in a skiff, and that's when Warren first heard me swear. So we decided a trailer sailor might be a better option. So we bought a Colt 23.
Right.
And that's when we did our first cruising, I guess. And we used to tow it up to the Whitsundays and cruise around for our holidays, and loved it.
Right. Okay. So you go and do the islands and tow it up and tow it back.
Exactly.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. And is that, I guess, where you learnt to sail through that experience?
Yeah. Warren was always adamant that, because we usually sailed just the two of us, and I knew nothing, that from the first boat we had, I had to learn how to sail in case he had some sort of accident and I had to bring the boat home. So he was fairly patient in the early days and taught me quite a lot. And then we were involved in clubs that also had assistance for the lady sailors, which was excellent.
Fantastic. So from the smaller boats in the early years, you moved up into some Seawinds. So you originally had a Seawind 1000. We've got some images here of the 1000 XL you had next phase, and then eventually onto an 1160.
Yeah, the 1000 XL was a great boat, Brandon. That was actually number 2 off the production line in 2007. As you might recall, whereas the other end of the scale was our last, 1160, which was the third last boat built in Australia.
There you go.
But they're great cruising boats. We've enjoyed them, as you can see, over 30,000 miles in the 1160. So we've used it quite a bit.
That's extraordinary. So hopefully there's boat number 3 there somewhere, but we'll get onto that later.
I think next week we hear about that, Brent.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned. All right, so let's talk about Tassie. I mean, this is an area that more and more people are starting to discover. I've got a few other owners and customers that have made their way down there, and they always rave about, I guess, the wilderness and sort of the location to explore. But for you guys, why would Tasmania be a destination? And obviously you took you back there twice now. So what was the attraction?
Well, the Wooden Boat Festival is in Tasmania in mid-February every second year. And in conjunction with that, the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania run a circumnavigation rally, the Van Diemen's Land Circumnavigation, the VDLC. And we decided to sign up for that, and we got into the fleet. They have a restricted fleet of 45 boats in that rally. And we certainly think that was the best way to experience Tasmania for the first time. Second time was to go back to visit some of the highlights on the southeast coast of Tassie. It's great cruising in that area.
And the rally was a full circumnavigation of Tasmania.
That's correct. Yes, starts in Hobart, and we'll talk about that in a bit more in detail later on. And brings you back there, it's definitely worthwhile doing. We met some great people, and maybe a few of those are actually watching today. I've sent a bit of a note out to some of them to rekindle their memories.
Yeah, good. Well, welcome. I know certainly it's been a location of lots of discussion in our local cruising fraternity in Sydney, so we'd love to get down there sometime in the next year or two. But so let's talk about planning for the trip then. And you've got some great notes and slides here that you've helped us with today to, I guess, give some good information for people thinking about heading down there. So this is your first trip, 2015, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yes. And because we sailed just double-handed, just the two of us, you have to set your boat up a little bit uniquely, I think, to accommodate that and drive it a bit differently with just two people on board. We wanted to be home for Christmas, so we had to set our departure date 1st of January 2015. Thought it allowed plenty of time to get to Hobart. And the first step is to get to Eden, and we won't cover any of that New South Wales coast, which has got its own little interesting anchorages, but to get to Eden and then wait for a weather window to cross Bass Strait was our first objective.
Yeah, so get down there after Chrissy in the peak of summer and arrive in time for the Wooden Boat Festival. Sounds like a pretty good schedule.
And come back before it gets too cold down there.
Well, very important. Yeah. Just before we move on, you mentioned that you set the boat up slightly differently for double-handed, short-handed cruising. What does that actually convert to on the boat? What does that mean?
Well, I suppose it's more the way we drive the boat, Brent. The boats are well set up for short-handed cruising, as you know. And our basic philosophy has been to sail pretty conservatively, although we do prefer to sail rather than motor. And I suppose the longer overnight passages we've done, we've focused on a 3-hour on, 3-hour off watch system, which works well for us. Seems to fit our sleeping patterns and keeps us safe.
Yeah.
We also have make sure for the last trip we bought the new personal AIS devices that we carry. We're very careful to always have our harnesses on because if there's only two people, if one goes overboard, particularly if you've got the spinnaker up, for example, it'd be a disaster. So you just can't afford to go overboard. And Warren had recently replaced the trampolines and lifelines and things like that, anything that might cause someone to go overboard unexpectedly.
Yeah, okay, so a bit of preparation and extra safety considerations than normal.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, and actually that question came in from Craig. Welcome, Craig Margetts, previously with us. Good to have you, mate. And if anyone else has questions as we go, ask them. If we can get to them, we'll ask them as we go. If not, we've got some time at the end to come through them. So just put that in the Q&A panel. So we'll move on. You've got a great slide here, Debbie, around provisioning for the boat. And so you set the boat up for a number of weeks there in preparation. So what, 7 weeks is it?
Well, I have a spreadsheet that I use every trip that we're going. I first did it in 2012 when we went to the Louisiades, and we were going to be offshore for, up to 8 weeks with access to no provisioning. So I had to sort of try and sit down and work out, well, how many Weet-Bix do you need for 8 weeks, for example. So we came up with some numbers and then put in however many weeks we were away, and therefore you need 56 Weet-Bix on the first line. The spreadsheet's got 142 lines. I keep adding to it. So in Tassie, the provisioning's pretty good because you can provision in Hobart, obviously. You can provision again up in Beauty Point in the Tamar River. Georgetown's got a supermarket. So it's not quite like going to the Louisiades, but it's still helpful for provisioning just to remind yourself about how much of everything you need. And I just changed the number of weeks depending on the trip we're on.
Yep. Yeah, okay, so it's a multiplier. You just work out the numbers you need and go and buy that quantity and stock up on the boat.
That's right. And some things you can stock a lot of if it's light. So we try and stock our paper products, paper towels, toilet papers, carry as much of that because it's so bulky and difficult to carry back, takes up room when you're carrying it back to the boat. But heavier things, the skipper doesn't like the boat being too heavy, so we probably don't carry the excess of those if we know we can provision along the way.
And where are you stowing this? These provisions, are they all in the pantry or fridge and freezer, or do you have other locations?
That's the other thing on the spreadsheet. We used to lose things regularly, and so where did I put those extra whatever? So we have a packet cupboard, we call it, which is the one in the 1160 under where your plates and everything are. And we have a tin cupboard, which is the one under the fridge. And then the 1160's got lots of storage. You don't realise until you do start filling it all up how much you can fit in. We've occasionally put things in the bilges, but try to avoid that. Usually, because we don't carry a crew, we put things in the second cabin. Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of room in those cupboards. We put the light things in the bow. The room for storage has never really been an issue for us. Yeah,
that third cabin often becomes a storage location, doesn't it? So that's probably an obvious spot if you're not.
We carry our bikes and spare sails there, so
right.
Usually food doesn't go in that area. That's sort of the junk room, for want of a better word.
All right. Okay. Well, let's move on. You've put some notes down here on cruising preparation. So maybe you want to take us through some of these key points that you were preparing, before the trip.
Well, I put rig and sail check at the top of that list, Brent, and we'll come to there'll be a story later on about about sails, which we've mentioned to you previously. I'll mention it later. Spare parts were important. We carry all spare pumps. I carried all spare pumps on the boat, but as it turned out, we blew out our accumulator down the west coast. So on your freshwater supply system, you've got your accumulator cylinder attached to your freshwater pump, mm-hmm. and that sprung a leak, that burst, the corrosion, whatever, most unusual. So we had to bypass that down the west coast of Tassie to keep and you can do that. It just means you're pumping continuously, so to speak. So the pumps, very important. We have replaced other pumps on other trips as well. Charts and cruise guides, and I mentioned the Tasmanian anchorage guide from the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania, which comes with the rally, and there's also another book which I'll hold up here, which I'm selling.
You're not on screen.
I'm not on screen. Okay.
Hang on. Let me bring that up because that's an important one. You want to show that for us?
So that's Cruising Southern Tasmania as well. Right. So between those two guidebooks, I think you've just got Tasmania pretty well covered. Again, that's Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania and TasMaps publication.
Right.
And you can buy that from the TasMap bookstore in Hobart.
Excellent.
Very useful guide because just that local knowledge, you just can't buy it.
The cruising guides are invaluable, aren't they? If you can get your hands on the ones that people tend to use. So great pointer there. Okay, and so you charts and cruising guides, and then passage plan.
Yeah, we did a passage plan for crossing Bass Strait, and we've done those for our other bigger crossings as well, just to try and think through any various scenarios. We started that when our first Louisiana voyage in 2012. Thanks to Guy Chester, the organiser of that rally, and we've used that sort of spreadsheet plan since then, just to sort of try and problem solve things before they come up. We carry a comprehensive first aid kit as per AYF Category 1 with lots of antibiotics and painkillers, and I remember Craig talking about that the other day. And also HF radio is a big feature down in Tassie. not every boat's carrying HF radio these days, but Tas Maritime Radio in Hobart and covers all of the state, as I recall, and provides a good backup service, because once you get to places like Port Davey and Macquarie Harbour to an extent, telephone reception's not there and VHF's not viable. So that's a good backup.
Right.
You actually need to have a HF radio for the round Tassie rally.
Right,
So,
right.
And
For
they
those
make you do a test call.
For those that don't have a HF radio, does a sat phone substitute?
I don't believe so, but you'd have to check with them.
In this day and age, you'd think it would, because it
I would think
provides
so.
the point of call for emergency, doesn't it?
Yeah, we seem to be putting
carry,
fewer and fewer HF radios on the boats these days,
Yeah.
in place of the sat phones. But yeah, it's good to know that Tassie's still at least listening. That's been one of the problems we've heard, that sometimes there's no one on the other end of the HF, but seems like it's still being monitored well in Tassie. So, all right. So tell us about the sail choice you had on phase 2, guys.
Yeah, we've since we've had the boat, we've upgraded the wholesale inventory. We're carrying the square top cruise laminate sail now from Barracuda, and the cruise laminate self-tacker was our main sail for the Bass Strait crossings, but we've got a large Genoa as well, which comes in handy from time to time. We're carrying a storm jib, which we've practiced using many times, but haven't actually used it when required. And spinnaker we're using is the 1.5 ounce cloth. We've got a heavier weight spinnaker, so we can carry it up into the low 20 knots through wind speed if we need to. Right. We have blown out the lighter spinnaker previously, so when that happened, I upgraded to the heavier weight material, and it works well. I'm very confident with it.
Now, sail choice is highly debated and always considered a lot for people coming into new boats and even buying second-hand boats. The choice of the Genoa, I mean, how often do you use the Genoa? I'm just curious on average. Is it a highly used one or less so?
Because we're double-handed again, Brent, it's a big sail to handle. We've got a good technique for tacking it and carrying it, but the big issue comes when you want to actually swap sails, and we do that. We have done that from time to time at sea, and Debbie doesn't like doing that because it means we both have to go forward to manhandle the Genoa down, fold it away, and then get the self-tacker out and hoist that, and it gets a bit of a handful.
I'm not sure we use the Genoa very much at all in Tassie, because you have a lot of wind all of the time, and even when you don't have a lot of wind, if you're sitting in a nice 15 knots, suddenly a 25 knot gust comes along out of the blue. So, but certainly up the Queensland coast, you use it a lot more.
Yeah, up the east coast, up through the islands. Whereas I guess you've got to be more prepared for the squalls and the heavier stuff heading south.
Yeah. The other thing is we always put a double reef in at night, so that whoever's on watch, it's fairly easily handled. You're less likely to have to wake up the other person that things are getting a bit out of control. You go a bit slower, but not hugely slower, and you just sleep a lot better.
And with just the two of you, how many hours do you do for your watches on and off?
We do 3 hours on, 3 hours off. Right. And the other thing with the sailing with the two, the off-watch person sleeps in the saloon. So we have just make up a bed in there so that you can grab them in a hurry if you need to.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, let's move on to safety equipment. You want to take us through your key items here that you've...
Yeah, well Debbie mentioned about the personal safety, inflatable life jackets with harnesses, jack stays fitted for when you leave the cockpit, you clip onto your jack stays to go forward. We're carrying a life raft under the barbecue at the back of the boat, which we there's no perfect spot on a Seawind for a life raft. As from what I can see, the ones up on the bows have their own issues. Like the inflatable Dan Boy, which a picture of there, which is basically a little packet you throw overboard and it self-inflates, and hopefully will be a marker for the boat coming back on the reciprocal course to find you and save you.
That's not you, Warren, in the photo, is it?
No, I've never launched it in anger, Brent, but I hope when I do it fires off.
Good to hear. Okay.
Yeah, they're a great little feature, that one. Personal AIS transponders, drogue and parachute anchor are also carrying for the longer offshore passages. And also, I suppose we should mention the Iridium Go sat phone predict wind package, which you were sort of alluding to before, I think. Really helpful for getting your up-to-date weather when you're offshore.
Yeah.
Highly recommended.
That seems to be a real one of the key resources now on most boats doing passages. So interesting though you were using that too. Just before we move on, the drogue and parachute anchor, again, have you ever used those in anger at all?
No, we've practiced deploying the drogue. And we've had the parachute anchor rigged up for the longer crossings, like going to Newcastle or across to the Louisiades, but no, we haven't deployed them. It would be a challenging exercise, I think, but I believe they work well. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we move on, get to the real interesting stuff, the actual crossing of Bass Strait, which is, I guess, what probably scares a lot of people from heading to Tassie in the first place. So how did you tackle this monumental feat, or is it so monumental?
Yeah, it is a challenge, Brent. I have to admit, I was a bit concerned about how we'd go, again, being the two-handed. Obviously, Eden for us was the stepping off point, getting there and allowing plenty of time for the right weather window to go south, and we'll look at weather a little bit further on. I think we had Deborah Scott here. We allowed a couple of weeks in Eden just to wait for something to happen, and also to go in company. And we've got Kaylani, the Seawind 1250 was our buddy across Bass Strait for our first crossing. So that was nice to have another Seawind to sort of pace against, and they were a little bit quicker than us, but we both got across safely.
Excellent. Okay.
So
we've got what's this out of? Is this out of
this is the bomb weather
right.
site.
Yeah.
So
Med-Eye, is it?
Wind site that I like to go to, and this is actually a picture from our northbound crossing. You can see 30th of March. We were going from Flinders Island, which you might be able to point to with your pointer, across to Lake's Entrance. But you've got a prevailing westerly, and if you're going north and I've got a westerly, I've got like a beam reach situation with the wind, on the beam or behind us, and that was great. And you can see it's lightening off as we're going north from the blue to the green to the yellow to the white. So there was a good wind pattern to go across on that trip.
Yeah, and then we've got another one here. I think
slide shows the wave.
Yes.
The wave picture about the same day, and you can see again we've got very comfortable conditions. The light blue indicating about 1 metre of sea. Again, from more or less behind the beam or directly behind us. So that turned out to be quite a good crossing for us. But it's not always like that.
Yeah, of course. But that is the difference, though, isn't it? Waiting for the correct window as opposed to punching out like they do in the Hobart, Sydney to Hobart.
Definitely.
Well, that's a lot of people's experience is watching yachts in their Hobart, and they think it's, that's what they have to encounter to cross. But really, if you've got enough time, it will be a good weather window. We have a friend who says the most dangerous thing on your boat's your calendar, and that's very true. That if you have unlimited time, or you're not pushing to get somewhere on time, then you can wait for the good weather. But I'd like to look at the waves first, and if it's blue, it's go, and if it's green or more, we start thinking twice. And I think the next couple of slides, Brent, will show the sort of conditions we don't like seeing. Purple's nasty.
So this is a wind map, wind forecast for the New South Wales coast, with that sort of east coast low developing.
Yep.
And that's 30 to 40 knots out there, and you don't want to be out in those conditions. In fact, coming north on their 2015 trip, we had 3 east coast lows up the New South Wales coast, and we hit from. They just got 30 to 40 knots over the deck for 2 to 3 days. I remember sitting in Jervis Bay, a hole in the wall, for 3 days. Now, wind generator kept us powered up just on the wind generator because it was rainy and overcast, but with 30 plus knots over the deck, the wind generator was certainly doing its job.
That's a really good actually point there that we don't have on the items here. The wind generator, we don't put many of those on these days either. How important have you found the wind generator over the years?
I'll answer this one because I was the one who wanted the wind generator. They don't work terribly well if you're sitting up in the sun days in a beautiful anchorage with 10 to 15 knots of breeze.
Right.
The solar's always going to go better. But as Warren said, Jervis Bay with 30 knots or Lizard Island with 20 knots regularly, they work well. I think where they helped us is at night, and particularly if you're on a reach, you've got a good apparent wind and you're running all your radar and your instruments and everything else. And it just stops your batteries getting really drained at night if that wind generator is constantly putting in amps to help replace what's being used. And in Tassie, there's plenty of wind, so you do get a fair bit of benefit from it down there. Right.
So you need plenty of wind. Yeah. Okay. So
20 knots, it starts generating right. A good number of amps.
Gotcha. We got another slide here. I think of that's the East Coast low example you're giving with waves, is it?
The wave pattern again. Well, if you got those big winds, you get those big seas. Like anything, like Deborah said, over 2 meters is questionable when you're getting up 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You don't want to be out there then.
No, we've got one of those coming through this week, I think. So it'll be interesting to watch out the window. But, yeah. Okay. So let's move on to your actual passage or your planning here. So this was your first trip over. Would you take us through that?
Yeah, the first one, we had a false start in Eden when we left. We left from Eden twice on this trip. The first time we only went down 10 nautical miles and turned around to come back because one of our Gorry propellers had fallen off, which I'll talk about later. But the second, that meant the weather window we were going on had closed. So it took us another probably 7 or 8 days before the next weather window came, and was only a 24-hour window to get across Bass Strait. So we just went to Flinders Island, which is the big island to the north of the main Tasmania island.
Yep.
Because there was a big another southerly front coming, and at least we got the protection of Flinders. And you can see we didn't sail the Rumline course there. We went to the east because as we hit that front down at point number 3, and we're able to sort of keep it on the, well, we weren't tacking. It was forward of the beam, but it was a good angle to come into Flinders Island on. Right.
And a little bit of motor sailing as well.
Well, we started off motor sailing and we ended up 2 reefs and 7 to 8 knots plus.
Okay, and you've got some images here, I think, from the trip, and some of that is pretty benign, but it looks like.
The one on the left there is at the start when we were motoring, and I must admit, I felt initially like I might have been missing the whole Bass Strait experience with this mill pond that we were motoring over. By the next morning, we had enough breeze that we could sail in a nice southeasterly. And as Warren said, as we approached Flinders, it really came in, and we were taking waves over the all the windows. And I thought, yes, I've got the experience now. I've had enough. I'll can't wait to get to the anchorage. But it was good, as Warren said, to have another boat, Kailani, with us. They were just ahead of us, and we were in radio contact all the time, and getting a bit of a heads up on what was coming.
Yeah, excellent. And then you did it again in 2019 on a slightly different route and rumline bullocks.
Well, this is more of the rumline course from Eden down to east coast of Tasmania, landing about Maria Island or Shooting Passage around the Wineglass Bay area. But that trip had its own challenges, Brent. We actually left in a strong wind warning from the northeast that day. I wouldn't recommend doing that either. It was a pretty rough first 24 hours. But as you can see, in the first 24 hours, we did 195 nautical miles, which is the most miles we've covered in 24 hours. And that was constant sailing with triple reef and a slightly foiled head sail.
Right.
But by the time we got to Tasmania, we were motoring. The crossing was okay, but I think you described it as the roughest experience you've ever had.
It was definitely the roughest night at sea, and neither of us slept much the first night because the problem wasn't the wind. It's very rarely the wind that causes you problems. It's the waves, and we had a beam-on swell that was sort of slapping the side of the boat, and the person lying in the saloon would get thrown to the other side of the saloon, which has never happened before or since. But it was just, the situation of Bass Strait's very shallow in parts, and so you get these waves build up, and it wasn't dangerous, and certainly the boats are strong enough to handle those conditions. It was just uncomfortable. That's what I told my mother anyway. It wasn't dangerous, just uncomfortable.
And do you think there's a benefit in either of the routes that you've taken here? I mean, going the other path to Flinders Island, was it an advantage or disadvantage?
Flinders Island's beautiful. The anchorage we stopped at, Killicranky, on the north there, the northwest side of the island, was beautiful and a lovely spot. And because we wanted to get to the Wooden Boat Festival, we kept moving, going down, but it was certainly a different area to look at. I think would depend on your timing and on the weather. If you're keen to get to Hobart, you'd do what we did in 2019 and do the straight route.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to Hobart then. And you've got some key ports and things that you must. This is the first trip, I take it, from Flinders down to Hobart? Yeah,
from Flinders to Hobart, we pretty much did day hops on that for that trip, and that was quite comfortable for us. Deborah reminded me we mostly had southeast winds, so the day trips were long enough because most of it was tacking.
Right. And then eventually down into Hobart via the Denison Canal. So we've got an image here of you passing through so that's a swing bridge or something there that moves out of the way, is it?
Yes, just to orientate you to the Denison Canal, is actually on the way to Port Arthur, and the canal cuts through that road. So that's actually the main road bridge that takes you across the Denison Canal. It's a swing bridge, and you have to call up the bridge master, and they usually send through convoys of boats. You can see Kailani and a couple of monos ahead of us on this particular transit of Denison Canal. But that's a pretty narrow canal, Brent. You look at each side and you think, my catamaran going to fit through there? But you do. But you always go through at slack tide, Because
Right.
when the tide's running either way at 6, 7, 8 knots, my friend Morris from Tasmania tells me they can run through there. So slack tides, and then you get a convoy of boats going through, because you're stopping the main road traffic to Port Arthur at the same time. So you've got cars banked up on either side to get a free view of your boats going through.
Mm.
But by going through here, you save having to go around Tasman Island. So
Right.
you save a lot of time and distance off your trip.
Yeah. Okay. And then down into Tassie, obviously the Wooden Festival is a pretty amazing boat show. This one, it's one of few around the world, I think, but very famous. So a great experience to check out.
Well, we've been there twice, and it runs for 4 days, and we've been every day. So we went for 8 days. We've been to it. There's just so much to see and do. It's just a great experience.
Yeah.
Highly recommended.
Heard a lot of good stories about this show, so quite a unique thing to go and see. So check it out. So let's move on to the circumnavigation. So as you mentioned earlier, you joined a rally that's organised, and I think they do it. Is it every couple of years they organise this?
Yeah, it runs every 2 years in conjunction, the same time as the Wooden Boat Festival. So it's definitely a 2-for-1 effort to go to Tassie for those two events.
Right.
Well worthwhile doing. 45 boat limit on the rally. I think we had 4 or 5 Queensland boats in the year we went, but there's a lot more have gone the years subsequent to that. 36 days for a 1,000-odd nautical mile journey.
And do you think it was advantageous going as part of a rally?
Definitely would recommend it. If you're first time to Tasmania, you just learn so much from the locals that are in the rally. It's the fleet, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmanians and Queenslanders, predominantly, a couple of international boats as well.
Excellent. And we've got some of the key anchorages you stopped. So plenty down around the southeast corner and quite a few along the top, but not so many down the west coast. So it's a little bit more sparse for anchorage options on the west coast.
Yes, it is, Brent. We'll go into a little bit more detail on that later, but you can see Tasmania is basically a triangle, so you've got the 3 sides to sort of negotiate.
Mm. Yeah, okay. Well, let's get into so East Coast. We had a look there on one of your other trips down there, but this is from the Tasman Peninsula.
Yeah, well, this one, and there's a couple of sort of images to come on the highlights of this leg, but I just want to highlight to people the fact that there was one longish jump, 104 nautical miles from Shooten Island to Great Muscle Row Bay, so from Anchorage 3 to Anchorage 4, but the rest of it was pretty much day hops and comfortable anchorages all along the way.
Yeah, and as far as the highlights, we've got some images here. So you visited Port Arthur and obviously Tasman Island. There are some of the key spots you went to.
Oh, definitely highlights. Yes, yeah.
The scenery is so much different to the Queensland coastline, particularly down that Tasman Peninsula area with those incredible rock formations that you go around. And the history of the convict area is also fascinating.
Mm. And then, so across the top, there are a few key spots that you dropped in as well, Devonport being a major one.
Well, the fleet has a couple of rallying points along the way, and one of them is in the Tamar River. So where you can see Launceston and number 3, Anchorage is Beauty Point Marina, which is part of the Tamar River, Tamar Yacht Club. So the fleet rallied up there, and the 31 boats from Hobart were joined by 11 boats that came straight across from Victoria, from the Melbourne fleet. The Geelong Yacht Club fleet joined us there. So we got to over 40 boats in the Tamar, and then we went across to Three Hummock Island. So you can see the marina there was full, and just as an aside, Brent, that with the 2 1160s there, they made the 1160 and the 1250, they made a temporary berth for us.
All right.
The cats weren't that well catered for there. What happened when you jumped off the boat?
Yeah, they didn't put any cleats on the pontoon, so we're standing there holding the rope trying to work out where to tie it because they hadn't actually put any cleats on it.
Right.
But, they were very accommodating.
You can't get everything.
No, that's right.
It was a dinghy pontoon that they floated across and attached to their marina finger. We had a spider web of ropes onto the pylons and to secure us, but it was a good, safe anchorage marina.
And one thing about Tasmanians, they're all so friendly, would do anything for you. And I think in the Tamar River, one of the locals lent one of the boats a car for the weekend, said, "I'll just bring it back when you're finished," and got upset when some beer was left in replacement because he didn't expect any sort of payment, just hand over the keys and away you go.
Yeah. And this is in Devonport.
This is in Devonport. We stopped here because our son joined us in from Beauty Point for the leg to Devonport, and we pulled in at the Mersey Yacht Club little marina there. That was quite comfortable. That's where the Spirit of Tasmania comes in, for those that have heard of that vessel that comes into Devonport. And the day we came in, the Spirit was coming in as well, so we had to just bide our time because they were turning the ship around in the middle of the river. It's quite safe.
Yeah, I was going to say, it had to take up a fair proportion of the river, no doubt.
It certainly did.
All right. Okay, so we've got a slide here now going down the west coast. Now, this is really interesting because I dare say probably not a lot of people end up down the west coast. How was this experience?
Well, you rally up at 3 Hummock Islands on the northwest corner of Tasmania. So our fleet was sitting there waiting for a weather window that we were comfortable with. And there were a couple, and various elements of the fleet took off. But it's 173 miles. You can see it's an overnight passage to Macquarie Harbour. So you need to time your run to get to Macquarie Harbour. We wanted to get there in daylight because we hadn't been there before, but some boats that have been there before were happy to go through at night, but we weren't in that situation. And then from Macquarie Harbour down to Port Davies, which is the southwest wilderness area of Tasmania, most isolated place probably in Tasmania. We've got a couple of slides of Macquarie Harbour.
Pretty spectacular photo here of the boat, partially airborne. And this is coming down the coast, is it?
Yeah, we'd left 3 Hummock Islands, so we left the northwest corner of Tassie, and we've just come out to start heading south, and we were on the wind at that particular point, but the wind sort of swung around for us further down the track. We just had to clear the island a little bit first. Yes, I think we probably had 25 plus knots there.
Yeah.
And this is Hell's Gates, for those that know Tasmania and Macquarie Harbour. This was the entrance, the only way in, and that's about 100 metre wide or maybe less opening. And we wanted to time our run there, so we got there in daylight, as you can see, but it was foggy and raining. But the crossing was okay. I think we might have had the tide with us. The current was with us at the time. We were happy with that, to get in there after that trip.
Right.
One of the highlights of Macquarie Harbour is going up the Gordon River, and I took a screenshot here of the chart plotter, because you run off the map, and I think we went about 20 miles up the Gordon River altogether with a bit of a mud map. That's all you've got, and hoping that you're not going to collect any logs or anything, but it's really spectacular, certainly worth going up and having a look. And there is a pontoon at the furthest point up that you can go in our size vessel, and so we spent the night up there and did some of the short walks, which was great.
So from Macquarie Harbour, it's another 90 odd miles to Port Davey, and this is sort of you can do great bushwalking, tramping through that part of the world, but you can see the layout of the whole harbour from this particular lookout. But it was cold and it was wet.
Looks quite
also
beautiful,
serene. Pictures
Yeah.
like that at times.
Yeah.
Not always.
That was one of the few times I think we saw the blue sky down there, Brent. We didn't have great weather on that trip, unfortunately, but it didn't stop us enjoying it and getting to most of the places we wanted to go and see. But some of our friends went back a couple of years later and had much better weather and probably saw it a little bit more than us.
So take us through. This is up the bottom corner.
Well, yes, Port Davy's around to Research Bay to Anchorage number 1. That's about a 70-mile trip, but you're going past Matsaika Island, which, from my research, is the windiest place in Australia. So that island to the south, which is DeWitt Island, that's the group where Matsaika Island actually sits with a weather station on it. And we had the fortune to get a nice tailwind across that stretch. I think the next slide will show that for us, that we're surfing down like 3 to 4 metre ocean swells there with a goose wing sail setup.
Right. And then into, where are we here?
That's Port Signet in the Huon River, getting in there. There's lots of beautiful anchorages. You get a lot of wind in Tassie, as we've said, and we when we're in Macquarie Harbour, there was actually a gale warning right the way around the state. But there's always beautiful anchorages you can hole up in. So it's just a point of getting from A to B and then having more lovely anchorages to explore when you're there.
And then where are we going here?
So the Iron Pot is a famous Sydney Hobart turning point, Brent. You may have been past there in some of your travels, but I have to get that iconic picture in my multi-hull central cap. I was lucky to have on board.
And moving on, and tell us, you said you had some dramas with a gory prop at one point.
Yes, we left Eden on our first endeavour to go south, and 10 kilometres south, 10 nautical miles south, we realised one of our propellers had fallen off and decided to go back to Eden, and within 3 days we had the boat hauled out, a new prop sent up from Melbourne, fitted on, and we were back in the water. And I think about 5 days after that, we had the weather window we needed to go. But I certainly highlighted to me the fact you've got to have a good diesel mechanic working on your engines, who I have now. But the people that did this job didn't do a very good job, because the other prop, when we expected it later, was also loose and in the process of spinning off. And internet research at the time showed that gories have a bit of an issue with this. They're only held on by nut friction and Loctite, as you know. And if that's not done to the correct tensionings, this is the outcome. That's about a $6,500 exercise to replace the prop, get the boat hauled out, etc. Not something you want to deal with. And the one on the right is the mainsail head. When we were going from Macquarie Harbour to Port Davies, we were tacking downwind and with a double reef main, and on one of them tacks we jibed and the mainsail fell down, and I was to discover that the head had actually pulled out. All the Kevlar webbing or probably the stitching had failed on the Kevlar webbing, and the ring just pulled out and the sail fell down. So we had to fix that in in Port Davey. And Deborah, you know how to fix these sails?
Well, we were lucky that we'd attended a presentation from a sailmaker a few years previously, and one of the things he said was, if this ever, that this is the most likely thing to go wrong with your mainsail is pulling the head out of it. And don't try and stick your needle through, use a drill. So we spent a whole day drilling holes and to sew the strapping on, which was spare jack stay strapping that we had on board. And we did intend to replace it when we got home, but it was such a good repair, we left it.
Right.
And,
so it did the trick.
A couple of years later.
When we sold that sail, we have sold that sail. We don't use that one anymore.
Right, with racing stripes on it. Looks very trick. Right. Okay. Well, good to highlight. To be prepared and also ready and able to make some running repairs if need be. I guess an advantage in going in a rally as well if you've got people around you that can help with bits and pieces at times.
Yeah, just watching our time, Brent. I'm happy to just say that was the journey. The journey north was again weather dependent, but a straightforward crossing over to Lakes Entrance in Victoria.
Right.
Well worth the visit there on your way north.
And then
we actually went up north. As Warren said, the Geelong fleet joined us in Tamar and went round to Hobart, and then they kept going, of course, to head back towards Melbourne. So we stayed with that fleet up the east coast, and actually came back with a couple of the boats from there across to Lakes Entrance. So that was good, and we had a few barbecues on the beach with that group. We're very friendly.
Abalone and octopuses, I remember.
Lovely. And this
is the other way to go north is just again the Rumline route from basically Wineglass Bay or Shooting Island up to Eden, and that was a 2019 trip. Again, a small weather window for us to do that because other friends of ours who didn't make that trip on that particular time were in Tasmania for weeks and weeks after because a window just didn't open up.
Excellent. And we've got some stats here for both the trips that you did. So between 3 to 4 months down there.
Yeah, you can see some quite big nautical mile numbers there, Brent.
And were both of these circumnavigations, or one was just the East Coast?
No, the 2019 trip was basically the East Coast of Tasmania only, down to Research Bay.
Right.
Yeah. So hence the smaller nautical miles.
Yeah.
Lesser nautical miles.
And the difference in the engine hours, is that because you had to sort of, muscle your way through some of the conditions a bit more, or benign conditions in the Strait?
Well, that's right. If you're motoring for 24 hours, you're putting on those hours. We didn't do as much motoring both crossings in 2019, so we probably had 2 days plus of motoring in 2015, just crossing the Strait. Plus, of course, when you're going up like the Tamar River, that's all motoring, and Devonport's all motoring to go there.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the main differences.
And then we've got some final recommendations that you've put together here. You want to take us through those?
Well, I definitely recommend joining the circumnavigation rally, the VDLC. Tie that in with the Wooden Boat Festival, and just allow plenty of time for going across Bass Strait, because until a weather window opens up, you don't want to be out there in my view. While we're in Tasmania, we hired a car and did some land cruising as well. And if you haven't been to Tasmania very often or at all, it's definitely a beautiful place to visit. Bushwalking and so on is great. But I would recommend going in summer. But even then, you need a special hat like I'm wearing and those sea boots.
Apparently the 2 years we've been have been unseasonably cold. but it is much colder than we're used to here in Queensland.
The sea boots I bet that's what good. The Tasmanians always say.
Should have been here last week.
That's right.
Yeah, no, it's a great place to visit. It's got so much history, such beautiful coastline. The Port Davey area and Bathurst Harbour is just, amazing. So it's worth it. If you like bushwalking, there's lots of places you can do bushwalks from the anchorages, which is good. So highly recommended.
Fantastic. All right, well, we'll go to the floor to answer a few questions. So we've just got some coming in here now. Oh yeah, good question here from Nick. He's asked whether you had heating on board the boat or not, and if you're okay without it.
No, we don't. We didn't have any heating, and we were okay without it. But we were in Tasmania in the middle of summer, supposedly. But we know our Tasmanian friends have heaters on their boats, and it's pretty standard practice for them.
Yeah, certainly a diesel heater we seem to get a lot of good feedback about, which is probably a nice addition for these parts of the world. And Lynn's asked here, which we did cover earlier, Lynn, but yeah, they did have you had a storm jib obviously on the boat. Not that you're saying you haven't used the storm jib yet, or you've used it a couple of times?
We used it going to New Caledonia at one point.
Right.
And we used it up in the Whitsundays, but we probably should have had it on the 2019 crossing during the night when we ended up furling our jib, because we were going too fast and would try to just become more comfortable at night. When you're bashing into waves at 8 and 9, 10 knots, it's not all that pleasant.
We've got a question here from James. Welcome, James. Good to have you on here. What were the range in anchorage depths, especially in Port Davey? So the depths of the anchorages you were dealing with.
It's a good question.
We'd probably have to check our logs and our cruising guides on that one, Brent. But I don't recall it being an issue in Macquarie Harbour or Port Davies. But we're carrying about 100 metres of chain due to our previous offshore experiences in New Caledonia and Vanuatu and Louisiana, where the anchorages are sort of 20 metres deep. But I don't recall issues with anchoring depths, not in the 10-metre range. We're quite happy to anchor in 10 to 12 metres.
2.6 in Clayton, 6 metres Schooner Cove. So less than 10 metres most places by the look of it.
But you do have to have plenty of chain out when you're sitting in Port Davies and you've got a gale warning outside. You've got 30 plus knots, 40 knots of wind. We were there, and a couple of boats were dragging off.
Certainly 100 metres of chain is a lot more than we usually see on the boats, which are typically with 50 or even 75 metres. So you find the 100 metres has helped you?
Well, when you're trying to anchor in 20 metres of water, and you drop 100 out, or nearly 100, a lot of it's not, it's just sort of going straight down.
In the Louisiades, that's when we first put on the 100 metres. You're often anchoring in 20 plus metres, so 20 to 30 metres. So you really got to have 100 metres of chain in those sort of depths.
Right.
And we've just always kept it at that.
Not necessary for the Australian cruising situations, I don't think, Brent, like you said. What Seawind's putting on is adequate.
Yeah. Another question here from Craig. Did you have your third reef permanently set up, ready for use?
Yes, we did. Craig, we had the second and third reef in for both crossings, all the crossings we've done, and carried it all the way around Tasmania as well.
Yeah, good. Question here from Brendan. Which navigation program do you use?
We use Navionics is on the chart plotter, and we use that on the iPad as well. That's the only ones we use.
And is that through a Raymarine?
Raymarine.
Electronics, yeah. And you were mentioning earlier that the Iridium Go was helping you to give predict wind forecasting for your weather.
Yeah, definitely worthwhile having that set up.
Yeah.
I think only issue with that is the subscription requirements of it, but I think now they're down to monthly.
Yeah, you can. We just do it on a as required basis. So the last trip to Tassie, we just bought the month so we had it for the crossing each way.
Yeah.
So you pay for a month. That's the minimum amount you pay for. But it certainly helps. That first night when it was really rough, I was hitting refresh on that all the time, trying to see when's the weather going to get better.
Yeah.
One thing Warren said about leaving in a strong wind warning, it was predicted to lessen. That's the only reason we left in those conditions. And it did lessen, but just a few hours later than expected.
Right. Question here quickly from Fred. How did the Seawind 1160 handle the trip?
Terrible.
I think it did pretty well.
All right, end the meeting. Sorry.
No, they're great boats. And I mentioned when it was rough and you're hearing the boat getting banged around, and we've already done a lot of miles, so we know how strong they are. I wouldn't want to be doing it in a boat I didn't have complete confidence in. And we certainly have complete confidence in the build strength of the Seawinds. They're not the lightest boats around, they're not the fastest boats around, but they're certainly comfortable and they get from A to B efficiently and safely, and that's the most important things from our perspective.
And you obviously went back for a second run, so it survives twice. Question here from Bernd. How much did the trip roughly cost you?
We never add that up, Brent. We wouldn't know.
That's a mistake from day one, is it?
It's not hugely expensive once you're moving, once you're on the go, but the setup of the boat, depending on the condition of your boat and what needs to be in first class order, could add up to a few dollars. But no, if I do that, the boat would be for sale next week, Brent.
Well,
you've got to stay on top of all the maintenance things, I guess, and Warren's very proactive at replacing things before they break. So if you're doing a bit each year, I don't think we had to do too much at all at 2019 because we'd had a big trip in 18 and we'd done a lot of work for that. So
yeah. Well, let's seeing you talking about selling the boat, it's probably a good segue to mention we today there will be a new Seawind announced that's going to be probably put all over the internet very, very shortly, or perhaps tomorrow morning. So, and next Friday we'll be having a special in-depth webinar with the Seawind factory about the new design. I can reveal it's in the mid-40s, but you'll see all the details come out very shortly. So stay tuned for that. Guys, we'll wrap it up there. We're just past the hour. So thank you very much. I mean, this is such a valuable piece of information for people planning to cruise down the coast there. And we really appreciate your time. Before we go, you guys are free to roam now already, but what's the next trip? That's the next on the bucket list that you want to achieve?
I think this year will be a fairly quiet year for us, Brent. Perhaps just run up to Fraser Island and Harvey Bay, and we can do that in a sort of a couple of days and spend a few weeks up there, come back, wait till things sort of calm down in the real world.
Enjoy your backyard, which is probably a great thing.
Well, we are going out later on today after we finish here, so we'll be thinking of you.
Well, I don't want to hold you up. So again, thanks guys. Appreciate your time. And we'll have the full replay of this on YouTube and on our Facebook channel. And if people want to make further questions, put them there. And I'm sure we can get them to the guys to answer. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And we'll see you on the water soon, I hope.
Okay.